truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Friday, December 8th, 2023, the 1052nd day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast on the day of its release. The only way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you will be supporting me, the work I do, and this show as it expands. And if you can't, or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free a couple days later on a wide variety of podcast platforms. And of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Now, before we get into what I want to talk about today or where I want to start today, maybe just a little addendum to yesterday's episode talking about the fourth in a series of debates in this fake GOP primary. That is not actually elevating any of these candidates in any way or making it seem as though there is some race to be run between them and Donald Trump. It is, however, showing the country that the Republican establishment has absolutely nothing to offer. Now, most of the people in MAGA, most of the people listening to this podcast largely understand that. They are on board with Donald Trump, only Donald Trump. There's no chance that their vote is going to be drawn away by Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or any of these people, even Vivek Ramaswamy, though he does say most of the right things, though certainly not all of them. Now, I talked a bit yesterday about how to think of this in a world where we know that the results of elections cannot be trusted. The election systems themselves are incapable of producing reliable results at this point. That has been true for who knows how long, but probably for a very long time and maybe the whole time. And in a world where the election results don't matter, then of course the votes don't matter. And the election is actually something else. The election is the regime and the media trying to convince the public that whatever they are given is the thing they said they wanted. And because the holidays are coming up, let's use this as a little aside. Let's say that you asked Santa for a BMX bike this Christmas. You want a brand new BMX bike because you want to jump it off ramps, maybe learn a little half pipe. You think that bike is just going to take your happiness to the next level. It's all you've ever wanted. Now let's say that Santa does not exist, and instead it's just your parents deciding what you're going to get for Christmas, and they decide there is absolutely no way in hell that you are getting a brand new BMX, but they know you want a bike, so what they do is go out and get you some rusty old tricycle that they stole from a 3-year-old. You want the BMX, you're gonna get some 3-year-old's rusty tricycle. You're getting the same thing either way. That thing you don't want, that thing you have absolutely no use for. But if that happens for too many Christmases in a row, you're going to realize that apparently your parents hate you or just don't know you at all. And then you might actually revolt. You might get upset at them. You might ask Santa for new parents, but parents aren't elected. They're chosen to. You can't vote them out. Are you going to revolt? Probably not. But hey, maybe if they do it enough years in a row, you might. Now, if your parents really don't want you to revolt, then what they could do, knowing that they're going to give you some 3-year-old's rusty tricycle, is start trying to convince you that what you actually want is that 3-year-old's rusty tricycle. And if they're able to do that year after year after year, well, then you'll never revolt. You'll never get mad, because when that rusty tricycle or whatever comes next year actually comes along, you'll accept what you're given, and your parents will be right there saying, "Hey, Jimmy, you said you asked Santa for a bike. This is a bike." And that is basically what we're dealing with here. They want to put Ron or put Nikki or put whoever in there, and they want people to accept it and think that they chose it for themselves. So now they are selling the idea that what everybody wants is Ron. It's not you that wants Ron, but everybody besides you wants Ron, which means they can just try to marginalize and isolate you as a Trump supporter. You're told that everybody thinks your ideas are stupid or evil or racist or homophobic or Islamophobic or anti-Semitic or blah, 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 blah. It's only you who thinks all those things. Everyone else thinks the other thing. And because everybody else thinks the other thing and no one thinks what you think, it doesn't matter that you don't want Ron DeSantis at all, and neither does anyone you know, because everybody else who you don't know and who you'll never talk to and who we'll never talk to, they want Ron. This is why they have such a hyperactive social media operation. It's not organic. These people are not self-starters. They are not expressing their support for Ron as an active principle. They are part of an information operation. And yes, maybe there's some chance it's all kayfabe. And if that is the case, just fine, because this is still the proper way to react, even if that is a possibility. But the purpose of this operation and why they're so loud is to convince the general public that there is this mass of people who absolutely will not vote for Donald Trump no matter what. So we need another option, and this is the best option. That is the case they're making, and they have the whole of mainstream media there to help them. They are trying to convince the totally detached from reality, standard issue uniparty villagers that they call centrists or voters in the middle. They're trying to create an illusion that all those people want someone who's not Joe Biden and someone who's not Donald Trump. That's why Ron is out there on MSNBC all the time. They are trying to create an image. And that's why it's important from our side to actually pay attention to this and to have tracked it this entire time. Because let's imagine that no one in MAGA who takes part in the conversation on social media about politics, if all of us and all of them had just been silent this whole time as Ron was making his TV appearances and Fox News was pushing him and he had his paid and coordinated online army talking about how great he was, and all we had was Donald Trump over on Truth Social talking about Ron DeSanctimonious. What would have happened if no one had engaged and pushed back on sites like X, formerly Twitter, or in alternative media outlets? Because that's very likely what would have happened in a pre-2015 information environment. And then you've got Fox News, all of Con Inc. media and influencers online, The Blaze, The Daily Wire, Town Hall, PJ Media, all that Salem media stuff. These are all well-funded, quote-unquote, conservative media organizations, all of whom are part of the Ron Op. If there was no pushback on social media and elsewhere from the Trump side of things, that would be the only voice out there on how things are going in this fake GOP primary. And think about this alternate universe that could have happened. In those circumstances, what would happen when regime and regime media tell us on January 15th that Ron DeSantis has won the Iowa caucus? Immediately, that tells everybody, wow, I guess even the Republicans are ready to move on from Donald J. Trump. And for the record, I am not convinced that they won't try that. I don't think that they will, but I'm not convinced. They absolutely could do that. And if and when they do it and they try it, the response will not only be from MAGA supporters who know that's wrong, it'll be from everybody. Because no one at this point could possibly believe Ron DeSantis has a chance in Iowa in January. The polls make it sound preposterous. You can argue with the polls all you like, but they're nowhere close for Ron, and everybody knows that. So they not only have to say that these polls, by which they have guided themselves in their political thinking for years or decades, their whole lives, those are no longer valid at all. And the betting markets that have Trump at like an 80% chance, those are totally wrong. Those are just based on the false polls, of course. The MAGA movement's absolute domination online, that doesn't represent anything. Trump's massive crowds at rallies versus Ron's poorly attended events, that doesn't mean anything. Trump being greeted by massive crowds everywhere he goes, that doesn't mean anything. Ron's atrocious debate performances, those don't mean anything. All the issues about his stature and his high-heeled cowboy boots and his awful facial expressions and his whiny little voice, those don't mean anything. We're just going to pretend that despite all that stuff, the country actually really does hate Donald Trump that much. And of course, that's all these people ever have to go on. Everyone hates Donald Trump. Everyone hates his supporters. Therefore, despite all of this real world evidence that attests to Trump's dominance, that's all wrong. In the old media environment, they could have sold the possibility of Ron DeSantis winning this Iowa caucus. If they try that this time around, no one is going to believe it. And at some point, either the establishment understands that and surrenders, or they just pour gasoline all over the Republican Party and light it on fire. And there's at least some chance they still do that, but I don't think they're going to. That same thing applies, obviously, for the Uniparty when it comes to the general election. If no one out there could possibly believe that Trump would lose, then their strategy is to try to get as many wins as they can elsewhere and subvert his presidency as much as possible. And they are making the public case for that now and panicking a great deal in the process. So the clearest communication there is that they no longer believe that there is a story they are capable of selling that will convince any American voters that Trump might lose in the primary or might lose in the general election. Now, if you're with me so far and you understand that the votes don't decide the winner of the election, it's really only about whether or not they can sell their choice to the American people, then as with so many other things in the information war, an information war that we know is happening because the other side admits it in the CTIL files, the real game is a battle of narratives. And this shouldn't be disheartening because the truth actually wins the game in the battle of narratives as well. It wins on a real world level and it wins on a narrative level, which is why we are so committed to this aspect of the narrative warfare and the information war. Simply by telling the truth and making sure other people are exposed to it, we can eliminate the possibility that they could convince the country that someone other than Donald Trump won. That includes the primary, that includes the general. And you can apply that same process to a new, very deadly pandemic or to any of the other concerns that they try to create next year in order to scare everybody back onto the same page. If they were winning the narrative war, they would be able to convince the country that someone other than Donald Trump could win, and they wouldn't need to be doing all of this other stuff. The indictments don't work. They don't only work in themselves because obviously they're nonsense. They're not working in the narrative sense either. They're not convincing the country not to support Donald Trump because of the indictments. They thought they could say to everybody, this man is under 4 indictments with 91 felony counts, blah, blah, blah. No one could vote for this criminal as president. Well, sorry, commies. Didn't work. Gonna stick with Donald Trump because we don't believe you. And the ultimate court is the court of public opinion. So we're going to have our opinions, and we are going to convince other people that those opinions are correct, and that if we simply follow where the truth of these issues leads, then not only do we win the narrative war, but we are on a glide path to a free and prosperous future. So we're going to go ahead and take that. They were not only able to steal the 2020 election because of the election apparatus that produced those numbers. They were able to convince enough of the country, including many Trump supporters, that Joe Biden actually could have won that election and received 81 million real lawful American votes after the counting stopped, with the vote spikes, with the machines everyone knows don't work, with the thousands of affidavits from witnesses who watched election fraud take place, from everything on video. All of it. All of it. Too many people thought, well, they wouldn't lie about this. I guess it could have happened. And I really am concerned about protecting our democracy, so I guess I'm just going to say the thing they tell me to say. If that can't happen, then they can't put one over on us. The way to guarantee that is not by pressing the right parts of the voting machine's screen. It's about making it an obvious and widely known fact about the real, observable, empirical reality all around you and all around everybody else that Donald Trump is coming back and he never left. He has a massive movement behind him, the biggest political movement in American history. And none of those other candidates, none of them at all, have a movement behind them. The closest person to having a movement behind him is actually Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's not any of these Republican pretenders, and it certainly ain't the illegitimate president, Joe Biden. But all of that is irrelevant. It's only Trump. Everybody knows it. That's where the election is won. It's not in the removable thumb drives and the hackable polling books. And understanding all of that, there would be absolutely no justification to give the regime what it wants, which is an open runway to let Ron DeSantis take off. I would love to stop talking about Ron DeSantis forever. And hopefully that happens by the end of January. But I don't really expect it to happen until the Republican convention, although maybe we'll know before that if the Republican Party actively tries to keep Donald Trump from being the nominee despite winning primaries. Okay, so let's get into some more regime panic. This is climate czar John Kerry sitting down for a live interview. He is on stage with his legs crossed, all dainty, a few feet away from another dainty little man with his legs crossed, mirroring John Kerry's body language. And it genuinely seems like they're flirting and perhaps even about to scissor. This is from Bloomberg's Green Summit.
So you can feel American leadership at this, at this COP. We've made progress. But hanging over all of this, of course, is the prospect of Donald Trump coming back into the White House next year.
That hangover? I don't think so.
That's journalistic license. If he gets in, the prospect there's this prospect that all of this could be for naught. So that begs perhaps an awkward and difficult question. How good is the word of the United States on the international stage at this point?
I think it's 100% good, and I think that nightmarish prospect, I'm not allowed to comment on politics, actually, so I shouldn't.
Well, I'm not stopping you. I'm sure the room would love to hear
You'd love
all
it.
of your thoughts.
My body language was enough of a...
Yeah.
Folks, no, I am not worried. Honestly, could he or someone else who doesn't want to listen to the science, who doesn't read about it and doesn't care about the facts, have an impact? Sure. But they're not going to turn this around. They're not going to stop this. I will say to you, they're not going to stop what is happening on a global basis. This economic transformation is going to be the biggest transformation in human history. It's bigger by far than the Industrial Revolution, and it is going to happen.
Well, all right. I guess we can just wrap it up and go home. All the conspiracy theories have now been proven. John Kerry admits on stage that this is a bigger economic transformation than occurred during the Industrial Revolution. And what economic transformation is he talking about? Well, of course, he's talking about this new normal that we are moving into, this 2030 agenda. Now, why are we moving into it? Well, you see, we had a very deadly pandemic. We had COVID-19, the Great Reset, literally the title of Klaus Schwab's book, COVID-19, the Great Reset. That was supposed to usher in our new normal. The Great Reset was going to be this transition to this new economic system. They need to get us on a global central bank digital currency, fully controllable, tied into your digital ID, your medical history, everywhere you go, your social credit score, what you spend money on, everything you say, everything you text, the whole thing all tied in together. The greatest economic transformation in the history of the world. So COVID-19, the Great Reset, started about 4 years ago now, and then started in earnest in the United States in the spring of 2020. But the talk was occurring around the world in late 2019. So 4 full years ago. That was supposed to be what caused this Great Reset, ushering in the new normal as we have this great economic transition, the biggest in world history, bigger than the Industrial Revolution. So we did the very deadly pandemic for a little while. We did lockdowns for a while. We did masks for a while. We talked about vaccine IDs. We talked about vaccine IDs being used so that you could go to certain stores or get on an airplane. We talked about electric cars in 15-minute cities. We talked about how you will own nothing and you will be happy. It's been 4 years, and there is absolutely no reason to believe that the way things are going right now requires building back better. The very deadly pandemic put a dent in lots of people. Those lockdowns destroyed businesses, destroyed livelihoods. People got depressed. They got addicted to drugs and alcohol. There was domestic abuse and child abuse. There was assault. There was murder. There was suicide. Very, very bad things happened. But most people would agree that we are pretty much past all that now. I get it. They want a new one next year. And Alex Jones dropped a lot of what he thinks is going to happen in his interview with Tucker Carlson. Go give it a listen. Very interesting interview. But why at this point, at the end of 2023, 4 years after the beginning of the very deadly pandemic, why now would we need a transition into something new? What are they saying is going to happen? What is John Kerry expecting? Now, he could say a climate emergency, but nobody believes that anymore. And he could try to sell Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum's polycrisis. But does anyone believe that? What's happening in the world right now isn't random. It's not natural. It is man-made, and it is intentional. It is visibly part of the agenda that John Kerry and his associates put forward. And as more and more people begin to realize that, the less effective this narrative manipulation becomes. And the only question remains, wait, why do you need this major transition? Sure, we're in debt, but you guys could stop spending money. You could just stop doing that. You don't have to send money to Ukraine. You don't have to send money to Israel. You don't have to send money for feminist dance therapy in Pakistan. We don't have to be spending money on the slave trade at the southern border. We don't have to be supplementing the endowments of colleges and universities as they indoctrinate America's youth. We don't have to be doing all of these things. We could simply stop spending money. We could shrink the government. We don't need this great reset. We don't need a world war. We don't need a Green New Deal. We don't need any of it. John Kerry is admitting that their agenda is to create the biggest economic transition in world history, bigger than the Industrial Revolution. They're going to do it whether or not Trump gets back in office. That's what he's saying. This thing is too big. It's too far advanced. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump does. John Kerry is essentially saying nothing can stop what is coming. And of course, in John Kerry's mind, or at least he's pretending, that what no one can stop coming is the Great Reset, is this financial transition. Now, the global agenda is explicitly collectivist. It's Marxist, it's communist, it's fascist. In different verticals, it has all of these different aspects. They are all variations of the Prussian system, and John Kerry is telling you about the authoritarian part in no uncertain terms. He is saying, regardless of the decision that the American people make as to who they want leading them next year, this plan is marching forward, and Donald Trump as president will not be able to stop it. Now, I'm not sure if it came across in the audio version, but if you watch the video, you can plainly see from John Kerry's body language and expressions that he is not nearly as confident as he is pretending. He goes from, no, that's not going to happen, to, well, even if it does happen, Donald Trump can't stop us. He's only missing a twirled mustache and a Dr. Evil laugh at that point. We are going to implement this new system worldwide that will affect everyone, the greatest economic transition of all time, and no one can stop it, even if the American people elect a president specifically to stop it. They are not allowed to stop it. The American people are not allowed to stop the advance of this global agenda. But don't worry, they would never, ever, ever steal an American election. And speaking of globalist panic, we have this from the Daily Mail. Foreign Secretary David Cameron warns world order will not snap back after Israel-Hamas war and appalling Russian and Chinese aggression. The former prime minister says allies of the UK and US must stick together. He was speaking at an event in Washington, D.C. for the Aspen Security Conference, and on the backdrop on the stage that he was speaking in front of, the sponsors were listed, and the sponsors were like Google and MasterCard and Microsoft and MITRE and the Rockefeller Foundation and the Walton Family Foundation and PayPal. Just absolutely the most globalist organizations you could ever possibly find. The article says, he warned that it won't be so simple for the world order to snap back to how it was operating before the conflicts. The first thing to realize is just how much has changed and how unlikely it is for things to snap back to the way they were before, says David Cameron. The foreign secretary spoke on the 82nd anniversary of the Japanese's attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which thrust the U.S. into World War II. Pearl Harbor was an, quote, appalling act of aggression, end quote. That was due to appeasement, he said. Ah, yes, if we had only opted for war earlier, we wouldn't have had World War II's 9/11. Don't you understand? If you go to war when they say go to war, then they don't have to do a 9/11 on your territory. Cameron added that it's much easier to stand up if we stick together in regard to China's increasing aggression toward Taiwan in order to avoid a, quote, second Chinese Pearl Harbor, which I think at least at this point would be China's first 9/11, or perhaps Taiwan's second Israel? I don't know anymore. All of the World War initiating false flag events just run together after a while. Cameron called for a two-state solution between Israel and Hamas, and when asked whether he thought Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would agree to that, Cameron laughed and said, "You'll have to ask him that." And he said that as long as you don't cross the red line of NATO soldiers fighting Russian soldiers, we should do everything we can to continue to support Ukraine. But there seems to be broad agreement that the status quo ante will not return. Now, there are two directions that can go. And the globalist side is going to continue to claim that they are in power, they are in control, their agenda will continue to be implemented, and there's absolutely nothing anyone can do to stop it, including and especially voting for Donald Trump. They're saying right to your face that you can't stop what they're doing. But if that was actually the case, then why the panic? Now, last week we talked about the CTIL files. I even mentioned them a little bit earlier. This is kind of an update, if you will, a thread from one of the reporters, Michael Schellenberger, working with Matt Taibbi and Alex Gutentag. Last week, an expert told Congress we had spread conspiracy theories about censorship, but we hadn't. And now yet another whistleblower has come forward with new files showing direct U.S. Defense Department involvement in a mass censorship scheme. They're explosive. The Pentagon was involved in domestic censorship scheme. New CTIL whistleblower files show. That is the new headline in Alex Gutentag's outlet, Public. Slack messages show how direct involvement of FBI, DOD, and DHS employees in a mass online censorship scheme deliberately misrepresented as cybersecurity. Last week, Public and Racket published the first CTIL files, which revealed the origins of the censorship industrial complex in offensive tactics developed by U.S. and U.K. military contractors. Now, a second whistleblower has come forward with Slack messages showing far greater government and military involvement in the Cyber Threat Intelligence League than we had previously discovered. And if you're not familiar, Slack is an app for internal discussions. It's like a series of internal chat groups within an organization or business. It's basically just a business productivity app. And if you're familiar with the app Discord, it's basically the same thing, but for organizations. So some whistleblower has decided to disclose messages from one of those chat groups. The CTIL Slack disinformation channel and the law enforcement escalation channel included current and former FBI employees, as well as personnel from the Michigan Cyber Command Center, the U.S. Defense Digital Service, and at least one European government. DDS, that's the Defense Digital Service, is headquartered in the Pentagon and was founded by Secretary of Defense Ash Carter in November 2015. DDS's website states the Department of Defense has a secret weapon. The Department of Defense told Public that it combined DDS with other agencies. DDS merged with 3 other organizations to form the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office, CDAO, back in February 2022. CDAO is not currently involved with CTI, and we do not have situational awareness on project participation, which predated that merger, a spokesperson said. As for CTI League, it claimed to serve an essential function, cybersecurity, protecting hospitals and healthcare systems from serious threats. However, according to the new whistleblower, quote, the essential function of CTI League was largely duplicative of other free and paid threat services available to healthcare defenders. Justin Frappier, who worked for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, of the Department of Homeland Security, wrote on his profile, the opinions expressed here are my own as an analyst and not those of CISA or the U.S. government unless otherwise stated. But Frappier put the CISA seal as his profile image and was an eager participant in the CTI League. When he first joined CTIL, he asked if the group was, quote, consolidating a list of disinformation resources to validate. A CTIL member replied, yes, we are working on that. There's a whole disinfo gathering and analysis operation happening in another group connected to CTI League, which we're working to incorporate as a threat stream. Responded Frappier, that's awesome. I think it's amazing to see this happening at scale. Long overdue, but massive effort. Note, they redacted the files to protect identities of individuals who did not appear to play a leadership role. These messages suggest that a government employee explicitly sought out a way to use the group for anti-disinformation activities and initiated access to these activities. Frappier, or I suppose it might be Frappier, contributed 573 messages to the disinformation channel of the Slack group. CTIL's disinformation team referred to using the law enforcement escalation channel. This channel had an FBI cybercrime employee and Montana's chief information security officer, who now works as a director at the Center for Internet Security, a CISA-funded nonprofit that manages information sharing for DHS. It is unclear how often CTIL's Disinformation League sent escalations to the channel. One member of the disinformation team, Andros Iklodi, worked for a Luxembourg government computer security initiative at the time of CTIL's activities, according to his LinkedIn. Iklodi previously worked for NATO. Iklodi appears to have set up a disinformation channel for CTIL in the malware information sharing platform that he helped develop. This is MISP. MISP is funded and sponsored by the European Union, and the COVID disinformation channel CTIL used was vetted by MISP. According to Sarah Jane Terp, this is the leader of the CTIL disinformation team. We talked about her in the first entry of the CTIL files. The Adversarial Misinformation and Influence Tactics and Techniques Framework, this is AMITT, talked about that last time as well, was added to this malware information sharing platform. The group, Terp said, was also inputting the Atlantic Council Digital Forensic Lab's disinformation taxonomy. When Terp explained that the group would be using MISP, Frappier responded, "I can't tell you how excited I am that we got this up and running. I am really looking forward to what this is going to be. I think it has been long overdue, and many, as you said, are working on similar issues. However, tying it to MISP is ingenious. I can't believe I've never thought of it before and have been working with MISP for like 5 years." The new Whistleblowers files provide insight into the group's inner workings, which Terp described as a parallel effort. Neither we nor the whistleblower know what the parallel effort refers to. In these new files, Eric Brogdon, a cybersecurity director for a private firm, and others appear to have attempted to interfere with physical gatherings, with Brogdon implying that he had the ability to get social media users suspended. When one member shared news about a call for anti-lockdown protests, Brogdon responded, "Let me see if I can get the Facebook user suspended." And if you have experienced this targeted censorship at all over the last few years, you know what it's like to be on the receiving end of this. You're like, I just said something normal and now I don't have an account? Think about what they're doing and think about what they're using this for. A citizen is frustrated with COVID lockdowns and wants the public to know that he's not the only one. So he organizes, or she obviously, organizes an event so that all the people who are frustrated with lockdowns can get together, show their faces in public, make their voices heard, make everybody understand, hey, there are other people out there who don't want to put up with this. This person working in a government-connected quasi-governmental organization can simply take that citizen offline. But don't worry, they're just being censored by a private company, so it's totally okay that they're being censored. They don't have a right to make use of that private platform that's never actually private. But they're not only using this to stifle someone's speech, they're using it to make it impossible for people to organize and get together and address their concerns to their representatives. They're directly manipulating the people's right to freely associate. And of course, we know that they shut down the churches. So it's not only that the First Amendment is under attack, it's that they're going to attack each and every element of the First Amendment. When asked about the incident, Brogdon sent to public an XKCD comic strip, which argues that the First Amendment does not prevent private internet companies from censoring speech. But if Facebook took action on this post, it could have been a direct violation of the user's free speech rights, and perhaps even right to assembly, as I just said, given the involvement of government officials in CTIL. Other files previously obtained by public show that Tom Sear of the Australian Defence Force Academy and the Joint Special Operations University was also a member of the disinformation team. No other leading participants in the CTIL responded to our requests for comment. Once again, we are confronted with the question, what was really going on with CTIL? Why were individuals associated with foreign governments, special operations, NATO, and DoD all participating in an operation to censor and influence U.S. citizens? And at the end of the article, there's an interesting infographic. I have to assume that this comes from the whistleblower documents or the internal work. Claverie and Cluzel 2022 are cited. This is figure 6-1, differences between COG war and PSYOPs. It says from counterterrorism abroad to mind control at home. The subheading, exploitation of the error of rationality. And it has arrows pointed in two different directions, one toward motivated influence and one toward cognitive disability. And it seems to divide along things that they want you to do, that would be motivated influence, and things that they want to stop you from thinking, that would be cognitive disability. And motivated influence, under that they have the PSYOPs domain, and they list action on beliefs, distorted perceptions, cultural illusion, anxieties and fears, personality weaknesses or strengths, and repression. On the other side, cognitive warfare domain, action on cognitions, sensory and perceptive overflow, just too much coming in, attentional saturation, no more attention left to apply to anything, tunneling of attention so that the attention is very focused but on all the wrong things, errors of judgment, and cognitive biases. Ultimately, what we have here is the government working with a foreign government, our Department of Defense working with a foreign government to quite literally mess with and manipulate the minds of the American people in order to corral everyone back into the pen, get everyone back on the same page so that they will either support the implementation of that global agenda or at least be rendered neutral and unable to stop its advance. And like John Kerry said, it's going forward no matter what. On the topic of the U.S. government censoring American citizens, this is The Federalist from Wednesday, December 6th. State of Texas joins the Federalist Daily Wire in suing the federal censorship industrial complex. The U.S. State Department is violating the U.S. Constitution by funding technology to silence Americans who question government claims, says a lawsuit filed Tuesday by the Federalist, the Daily Wire, and the state of Texas. The three are suing to stop, quote, one of the most audacious, manipulative, secretive, and gravest abuses of power and infringements of First Amendment rights by the federal government in American history, says the lawsuit. It exposes federal censorship activities, even beyond the dramatic discoveries in a pending U.S. Supreme Court case, Murphy versus Missouri, also known as Missouri versus Biden. This lawsuit alleges that the State Department is illegally using a counterterrorism center intended to fight foreign disinformation, instead to stop American citizens from speaking and listening to information government officials dislike. Other recent investigations have also found government counterterrorism resources and tactics being used to shape American public opinion and policy. Through grants and product development assistance to private entities, including the Global Disinformation Index and NewsGuard, the lawsuit alleges the State Department, quote, is actively intervening in the news media market to render disfavored press outlets unprofitable by funding the infrastructure, development, and marketing and promotion of censorship technology and private censorship enterprises to covertly suppress speech of a segment of the American press. The article gives some background on the revelations of government censorship over the last year or so from the Twitter files on. And they note that the judge in Missouri versus Biden refrained from stopping the State Department's participation in the censorship enterprise because they hadn't seen enough evidence, but the Federalist claims that the evidence is here. Even though Congress and the Constitution have banned the federal government from silencing Americans, the State Department's Global Engagement Center has morphed into, quote, the lead in coordinating the government's efforts to silence speech, according to the lawsuit. The lawsuit names as defendants the U.S. State Department, the Global Engagement Center, and multiple department officials, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken. GEC originated as a counterterrorism agency created by an executive order from President Obama. Through GEC, the State Department evaluated more than 365 different tools for scrubbing the internet of disfavored information. The department also pays millions to develop multiple internet disinformation tools. It also runs tests on censorship technologies and awards government prize money to those most effective at controlling what Americans say and hear online. All of this according to the lawsuit. So how about that for entrepreneurship and innovation? If you can create technological tools that allow the government to get away with censoring your fellow citizens, you can get rich. This is what they try to repackage to us as the free market operating on its own and private organizations doing the censorship. It's not the government. It's just that the government will pay these organizations to do it if they're able to. State then shares these censorship technologies with companies, favored media outlets, academics, and government agencies. Wow, really? They allow companies, media outlets, academics, and government agencies to access the same censorship technologies. Isn't that incredible? It markets these government-funded censorship technologies to Silicon Valley companies, including Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. The tools included fact-checking technologies, media literacy tools, media intelligence platforms, social network mapping, and machine learning and artificial intelligence technology, the lawsuit says. At least two of the censorship tools the State Department has funded, developed, and awarded have targeted the Federalist and the Daily Wire, the lawsuit says. NewsGuard and GDI wield these tools developed with governmental assistance to deprive government criticizing news outlets, including the Federalist and the Daily Wire, of operating funds. Now, the Daily Wire is already falling in line on virtually every issue that genuinely matters. The seriousness of the very deadly pandemic, the obviously stolen election, the very violent insurrection. Most of their cast supported taking vaccines. So their place in this seems awfully strange, but hey, I guess we'll see. Maybe somehow the Daily Wire are all great people and were just asked to ignore the usurpation of the United States and went along with it. But back to the article, and speaking of these censors, they do it by rating conservative outlets poorly, falsely claiming these outlets purvey, quote, disinformation and are, quote, unreliable. That deprives leftist media competitors of high-value ad dollars from the big companies that use these rating systems. Such companies include YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat, Best Buy, ExxonMobil, Kellogg, MasterCard, and Verizon. Advertising companies that subscribe to GDI's blacklist refuse to place ads with disfavored news sources, cutting off revenue streams and leaving the blacklisted outlets unable to compete with the approved low-risk media outlets, often legacy news, the lawsuit says. So the claim here is that the Daily Wire is being deprived of potential ad money because their site appears on one of these blacklists. Rating companies like NewsGuard and GDI base their low ratings of outlets like the Federalist, at least in part, on politically charged fact checks of a tiny percentage of the outlet's articles. While these companies' full ratings criteria are secret, in December 2022, GDI published a top 10 list of its most favored and most disfavored news outlets. The Federalist and Daily Wire appear on GDI's 10 riskiest list. And to be clear, the 10 riskiest sites are all 100% normie sites. The New York Post, Reason Magazine, Real Clear Politics, The Daily Wire, The Blaze, OAN, The American Conservative, The Federalist, Newsmax, and the American Spectator. Now, I'm not saying all those outlets are bad outlets. Some of them produce fine work, but they are all geared towards standard issue, uniparty right villagers. OAN can blow some minds every now and then, but the rest of that is just common normie fare. Among the least risky sites, NPR, AP News, the New York Times, ProPublica, Insider, USA Today, Washington Post, BuzzFeed, The Wall Street Journal, and HuffPost. Just straight up corporate regime propaganda. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton's office on X, formerly Twitter, posted, Texas, the Daily Wire, and Federalist have sued the U.S. Department of State, Secretary Antony Blinken, and other government officials for engaging in a conspiracy to censor, deplatform, and demonetize American media outlets disfavored by the federal government. Through its Global Engagement Center, the State Department actively intervened in the news media market to limit the reach and business viability of domestic news organizations by funding censorship technology and private censorship enterprises. Congress authorized creation of the Global Engagement Center expressly to counter foreign propaganda and misinformation. Instead, the agency weaponized this authority to violate the First Amendment and suppress Americans' constitutionally protected speech. The complaint describes the State Department's project as, quote, one of the most egregious government operations to censor the American press in the history of the nation, end quote. Speaking of lawsuits going after the problems on social media, New Mexico Attorney General Raul Torres has accused Meta platforms of creating a quote-unquote breeding ground for child predators on Facebook and Instagram in a lawsuit filed on Tuesday, this according to CNN, the latest in a string of legal actions related to alleged harms to young users caused by the social media giant. Meta allegedly exposes young users to sexual content and makes it possible for adult users they don't know to contact them, putting children at risk of abuse or exploitation, according to the complaint filed in New Mexico State Court. CNN's article from Wednesday, by the way, New Mexico lawsuit accuses Meta of creating breeding ground for child predators. Meta has faced growing scrutiny over the impact of its platforms on young users in recent years. The social media giant has been sued by various school districts and state attorneys general in lawsuits related to youth mental health, child safety, and privacy. Former Facebook employee turned whistleblower Arturo Bejar also told a Senate subcommittee last month that Meta's top executives, including Zuckerberg, ignored warnings for years about harms to teens on its platforms. We have seen a series of social media whistleblowers in the past. Most of them have seemed to be limited hangout operations. The social media giant last month also sued the Federal Trade Commission in an effort to prevent regulators from reopening the company's landmark $5 billion privacy settlement from 2020 and from banning the social media giant from monetizing the user data of children. Meta strongly denied claims that its platforms put children at risk. We use sophisticated technology, hire child safety experts, report content to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and share information and tools with other companies and law enforcement, including state attorneys general, to help root out predators, a Meta spokesperson said. Back to the Attorney General's suit, my pal Behizi summarized some of the claims on X, formerly Twitter, saying the investigators created accounts as 14-year-olds and their findings were disturbing. Zuck's platforms proactively served and directed the underage users a stream of egregious, sexually explicit images, even when the child had expressed no interest in this content. And again, these are investigators posing as underage children. Enabled dozens of adults to find, contact, and press children into providing sexually explicit pictures of themselves or participating in pornographic videos. They recommended that the children join unmoderated Facebook groups devoted to facilitating commercial sex. Allowed Facebook and Instagram users to find, share, and sell an enormous volume of child pornography, and allowed a fictitious mother to offer her 13-year-old daughter for sale to sex traffickers and to create a professional page to allow her daughter to share revenue from advertising. Now, there is an extensive list of examples of how these platforms can be exploited and also how they simply allow all sorts of child sexual abuse material, various groups, and even communications on child trafficking, all to exist on their platforms. Elon Musk himself exposed a lot of this after taking over Twitter last year. This stuff is fairly well known, but now we're beginning to see some of these stories converge and all of this coming to a head as the public awakens and begins to understand what's going on. Now, again, I'm a little worried about this New Mexico Attorney General. I talked about some of this on Badlands Daily this morning. The man received at least $100,000 from a George Soros-associated political action committee. He's obviously a Democrat. He is the man who kind of went after, at least in the public narrative, the Democrat governor of New Mexico when she tried to get all crazy about taking people's guns. And so he's a bit of a wild card. But there is at least some reason to be suspicious of this effort, considering those ties. Is it possible that they're going to try to collect all of the evidence and cordon it off so it can't be used elsewhere? Maybe. Does that sound like a conspiracy theory? Okay, if it does. But we have seen how lawfare has been used to disrupt the normal flow of investigations and any measure of public disclosure. It's also possible that this guy is just a good guy in disguise and doing good work, and that the money was directed to his campaign specifically to make him look like he was on the side of the George Soroses of the world. But that is just speculation, and I don't think that there's any reason to bias toward that viewpoint without some evidence of that happening. There is a lot here to be suspicious about. And speaking of potential attempts to cordon off evidence or prevent evidence from even being discovered, Hunter Biden was indicted last night. Hunter Biden is so indicted. He has been indicted for other things, and now he's being indicted again. We should all be so excited or so depressed that Hunter hasn't yet been indicted for the big things. Or we can just consider that this is an ongoing, slow-moving, public disclosure operation that will not satisfy any of us who have known about all this for 3+ years. But it will capture the attention of standard issue uniparty villagers, the sorts of people who think that Joe Biden actually received 81 million real lawful American votes. This stuff is obviously major mainstream news, so it's possible that it might be getting through their soft little heads. Hunter Biden faces 17 years in prison after spending millions on lavish, hard partying lifestyle while dodging taxes, according to the special counsel, and this is from last night in the New York Post. Hunter Biden was indicted Thursday on 9 charges, including 3 felonies, in part for allegedly dodging more than $1 million in taxes while living a hard partying, extravagant life over a 4-year period. The 3 felonies leveled against President Biden's 53-year-old son, who faces a maximum penalty of 17 years in prison if convicted on all counts, include 1 count tax evasion for his 2018 personal taxes and 2 counts of filing a false return for his 2018 personal taxes and on a corporate tax return for his company, Owasco PC. He has also been hit with 6 misdemeanor counts of failure to pay and failure to file for the 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019 tax years. The defendant engaged in a 4-year scheme to not pay at least $1.4 million in self-assessed federal taxes he owed for tax years 2016 through 2019, special counsel David Weiss wrote in the 56-page indictment out of the Central District of California. Biden spent his cash on, quote, drugs, escorts, and girlfriends, luxury hotels and rental properties, exotic cars, clothing, and other items of a personal nature. In short, everything but his taxes, according to the indictment. Weiss highlighted that Biden used a business line of credit to make more than $27,000 in payments to a porn site, which in total accounted for 1/5 of all the business line of credit expenditures. The porn payments were among nearly $189,000 the first son spent on quote-unquote adult entertainment while not paying taxes, according to Weiss, including a $10,000 payment for a sex club membership that he expensed as a golf club membership. He also claimed a false deduction for consulting that was, in truth and fact, payment to, quote, various women who were either romantically involved with or otherwise performing personal services for Biden. More than $680,000 went to these women while Biden wasn't paying Uncle Sam. So Hunter Biden has so far been indicted for avoiding taxes and improperly filling out federal forms involved with the purchase of a firearm. Now, it's quite clear that Hunter Biden has violated the law. His attorney, Abby Lowell, released a statement saying that if it wasn't Hunter Biden, if it wasn't the Biden name, no charges would be filed. And in most cases, that's probably true. These aren't the sort of things that are always investigated. People can get away with these things for a period, sometimes, or avoid accountability completely. But let's get one level below that and forget about the fact that it is Hunter Biden. Let's talk only about American principles. Should you have to fill out forms to buy a gun? Should the state have a say in whether or not you can buy a gun? If you ask me, the answer's no. I think if you ask the Constitution, the answer's also no. And what about taxes? Should we have to file with the IRS every year? The answer's no. Should you have to pay all that income to the federal government? Taxation is theft. The answer's no. And especially when the government is this corrupt and using the tax money to pay for their foreign adventurism and foreign aid and all of the global money laundering. And let's consider the fact that we have already had our indentured servitude extended well beyond our lives and our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives based on all of this federal debt that could obviously never be paid, hence the need for that great economic transition. But the thing is, they just create new money out of thin air, and we call it printing new money, but they're not even really printing it. They're just creating new numbers so that they can give those numbers out to whoever they want. And when they create those new numbers, what they're actually doing is reducing the value of the money we have. They are creating new numbers for themselves and taking away our numbers. And then you remember that the very wealthy avoid taxes through all sorts of different means, one of which is giving all their money to philanthropic causes and charities, nonprofits, sometimes non-governmental organizations. The best people out there, the most powerful people out there, they're all philanthropists. And of course, poor people don't really pay taxes either. So who pays taxes? Well, hourly employees pay taxes, and the middle class pays taxes, some of them at least, and businesses pay taxes, some of them at least, but some don't. Well, which ones don't? The ones that don't are the ones who have laws written for them so that they don't have to pay taxes. So once again, we just have the regime deciding who it wants to take money from and who it doesn't want to take money from. They're not only choosing the winners and losers based on the regulations and which organizations get tax money directly to conduct business. They're deciding who does and who doesn't have to pay, and they choose who to pursue and who not to pursue. And at some point, you just have to see it as them deciding that they are not going to allow certain people to gain the sort of financial stability that would allow the empowerment of those people's viewpoints. They need a certain viewpoint to be empowered and another viewpoint to be shut down. And this is yet one more element of government control that allows them to do that. Now, House Republicans this week were trying to subpoena Joe Biden's brother, James Biden, and of course Hunter Biden, and bring them in for testimony. And there was some discussion about whether the testimony would be behind closed doors or out in public. If it was in public, more would be disclosed, but it would also be a bigger spectacle. And if it was in private, maybe they could address other issues that the public isn't allowed to hear about yet. But maybe that would better help the legal process. Well, now Hunter's not going to have to come in at all, most likely, because they'll just argue that he's all tied up with these other things. Now, Hunter may be a whistleblower. He may be an informant, whatever that is. That's cool. That's possible. We keep ourselves open to that possibility and that interpretation, and we'll watch events in the future as they arise, and we'll see what maps onto which reality. All good. But this seems to be where we're at right now. Now, the mainstream media is asserting that there is no two-tiered system of justice in the country because this proves that they're willing to go after Joe Biden just as they are willing to go after Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's New York trial has been ongoing. Trump has been drawing attention to that trial. He's produced witnesses that say quite clearly no bank would ever make their lending decisions without doing their own due diligence. So there's absolutely no way Donald Trump could have defrauded anybody. And in the emails, the records, contemporary records from the people at the banks show them calling Donald Trump a very safe bet. They are very happy to be doing business with Donald Trump and the Trump organization. He quite clearly did not defraud anybody. But that doesn't mean he won't be found liable for civil fraud in New York State. And I expect that we will probably see that decision soon, before Christmas, I would guess. And people are going to fret. They're going to worry. They're going to wring their hands in great concern. Oh, how did Donald Trump get found guilty? Well, we know how Donald Trump's going to be found guilty. It's because all these people are corrupt. These people are communists. We need to learn these lessons, and hopefully the public will learn them. And Donald Trump will survive, and he'll be just fine on appeal. This is election interference because they know what's coming. And like John Kerry says, although the other way, nothing can stop it. I'll be back on Monday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com. And you can find everything else by heading to Linktree. Linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's hell!